Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Friday morning episode. We're joined by Dr Gavriel or Gav Schneider, who is the Group CEO and Principal Consultant with Risk2Solution, and he's got too many hats on. I had to fit it all into this particular title. He's the Conference Convenor for the Protective Security in Government, conference, which starts next week. On a virtual conference, unfortunately, but it was scheduled to be in Canberra. And he's also the project co-lead and senior researcher for the Security 2025, a roadmap for the future report, which looks at the security sector and is also calling for a new sort of structure to the Department of Home Affairs on managing the security industry at a federal level. So we're going to be looking at, again, Security 2025 roadmap for the future with Dr. Gav Schneider. Let's bring on Dr. Gavriel or Gav Schneider. Gav, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks, Chris. Great to chat to you.
And while I've got you up there, I'll swap that around. Conference Convenor. So we're going to touch on the Protective Security in Government Conference next week, 14th and 15th. And you're also the project co-lead and senior researcher for Security 25, a roadmap for the future. Let's touch on the report itself. I think this was this was sponsored and facilitated by the Australian Security Industry Association Limited, or ASIAL, and I'm a member of ASIAL. Maybe talk us through the report and what your key findings are. And I might be a little bit sceptical on the outcomes of these types of reports, but let's see how we go in terms of if anyone's listening.
Thanks, Chris. And skepticism is totally understood.
Good, and, thank you.
We can absolutely explore that a little bit as we go. So my business, Risk2Solution, acquired the Australian Security Research Centre about 3 or 4 years ago. And ASIAL basically contracted us to do the study into where we think the security industry should be going in 2025 and how to get there. So the basis of any future-looking study is, you can't forecast where you want to go if you don't know where you are. So we had to start off with, a bit of a research focus to understand where we were at. So that part consisted of a big survey that went out. We had hundreds of responses from security providers. It also went out to security users. We ran, I think, 7 focus groups. We did 18 interviews and a really robust international literature review. We then merged all of that together and tried to get to a point where we could do a SWOT analysis. And from that SWOT analysis, we then put together a roadmap of where we think the industry should be going based on where it's at. So, it has been Australia's largest study into the security industry to date. And, while none of us have a crystal ball, it was really interesting to sort of look and explore as to what we think good looks like. And, if nothing else, the report at the very least does highlight what good could look like for a security industry.
Well, look, some of the stats, and let's just highlight, there is a security report executive summary available, and then the report is also available for ASIAL members. And we've also got it for sale on the MySecurity marketplace as well. So you can access the full report. Otherwise, an executive summary is available. So the estimated annual revenue generated by the Australian private security industry is approximately $11 billion per annum. And that's estimated to be growing at about 3% annual growth now and through to 2028. And then we are employing over 180,000 people, including 153,000 licensed security personnel. And it's significantly larger than the combined size of the Australia's police and defence forces, which is, again, a good segue from what we've just been discussing with Will and John. What is the, I suppose, for the audience, the key ones? What would be your top threes, Gav, out of this, that maybe if you're talking to the 3 people, one, talking to government, talking to the industry, and then maybe talking to the professionals themselves, say you and I at a consultancy level, what we would be looking at. So what's the sort of the top ones for government that we need to be asking for or seeking?
Sure. I think let's take the key finding from my perspective, and there were many, in a 100-page report, there's a lot of stuff you can pull out. But I think the key thing that we really found is that, no one role player or stakeholder can be responsible for professionalizing an industry. And there's this perception among, for example, providers that, oh, you know, ASIAL must solve the problems, or regulators must solve the problems, or government must solve the problem. So really, probably the big key takeaway for me is that there were three key stakeholder groups we identified that all need to, you know, contribute to improving and professionalizing the industry. That's the providers, you know, the people actually providing the service.
Yep.
And it's really important to note that that's not, you know, specific to saying, oh, it's the guards or the electronic security or the cyber security. It's really the idea that convergence is coming hard and fast, whether we like it or not. Organizations are maturing where they just want to solve problems and manage risks and threats. And the way we've siloed our organizations, industries, and provision is not necessarily helping achieve that, nor will it be sustainable as things change, which I think is a topic we'll get into shortly.
Yeah.
So it really is the sum total of the providers, the regulators, and the users that all have things to do. Obviously, there are additional stakeholders, the media, other government agencies that have a critical role to play. And you know, you mentioned earlier, and it's a great segue from what John and Will were talking about, that one of the biggest pieces that, you know, this is not a new issue for anyone in the security industry, but it kept coming up again, was this national consistency, national licensing. And what was really interesting in doing the research is we totally expected that to be something that providers were unhappy about, because we know. But it was really interesting to see that users were also unhappy about it.
Yep.
And it caused a lot of frustration for, you know, chief security officer, security managers who had multi-state operations, who had different rules and different regulations to play within each state. And linking that to the idea of national security, how can the private security industry play the role it can play, which is a significant force multiplier? It is a significant protective structure. If you think about it, and to your point around the statistic that the security industry is larger than all our law enforcement and defense personnel combined, you know, it's a significant role player in protecting not just business interests, but, you know, who's guarding army bases, who's guarding government government buildings, you know, who's actually securing cyber infrastructure. You know, it's the private security industry that's doing all of those things, whatever banner they work under. So, you know, this idea of coming together is really important. This idea of some sort of national consistency is really important. And then I think the third one, since you asked for three, there's we could put out, is around the perception, the image of the industry. And whether we like it or not, you know, our industry does not have a great reputation, and the media certainly doesn't help that. No offense, Chris. But realistically...
Well, that's why we're here, actually. That's why we're trying to professionalize it and bring it up. But keep going with your point. But yeah, I've got some thoughts there.
So let's just take COVID as an example. You know, the security industry got slammed in the hotel quarantine debacle down in Victoria. And, you know, once the commission was held and all of that, arguably it switched where you could go, actually, hold on, the security personnel and the security providers were actually victims of poor contract management, poor standard setting, and lack of duty of care.
Yep.
But that never made the media.
But I think the other point, and maybe the report will broaden that out, is the depth and the breadth of the security industry is also that's part of the problem, is bringing them all together. And I've always found that the industry is segregated, and then you can pick, you know, and that's what the media does. We'll pick pieces of, oh, well, that's just the security industry. It's a security guard, so therefore that represents the whole security industry. Whereas cybersecurity, you know, it's sort of often segregated out of the security industry, but actually, as you say, it's converged now that they both have dual roles in one. And anyone looking at cybersecurity is obviously going to be looking at physical security too, but they're not necessarily subject to licenses and the licensing and regulation framework as well. In fact, there's no regulation for cybersecurity practitioners, which is ironic. Anything come out of that for this report?
A little, not too much. In fact, it was kind of interesting to note that while we had lots of calls for cybersecurity professionals to engage with us, you know, they were one specific specialist group that we had low engagement from.
Right.
Okay, and that's telling in its own right that, you know, there's a lot of resistance to this idea that people from the ICT sector actually are part of the security sector. And conversely, it's quite similar in many parts of the security industry the other way. you know, where even electronic security experts who in many ways are doing cybersecurity.
Yeah, of course.
They also kind of resist the, you know, oh no, we don't do cybersecurity, we do, you know, access control, or we do integrated security solutions. But just the term integrated, you know, kind of gives it away.
Yeah.
So I think the convergence piece, it's coming, whether we like it or not. And what we try to do in the report was to provide some key guidance points or roadmap suggestions for those three stakeholders to help us move forward. And it was really interesting to note that, you know, a lot of the stakeholders, when we're doing the research, particularly the ones from, you know, electronic security providers, etc., we're quite passionate that, oh, by 2025, you know, technology, automation, robotics are going to disrupt the industry, you know, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go the way of Singapore. And we actually interviewed people from Singapore during this research, and the feedback they told us is Australia's 20 years behind us. So, and the other thing we found, and there's a whole section in the report on this, is by 2025, we are not going to be where the US, UK, and Singapore are from a technology adoption perspective. Our environment is different. We will eventually get there. We will have no choice because, you know, the realities of efficiencies, cost saving, etc., will drive automated solutions. But it probably won't happen at the expense of man guarding. It will probably happen together with man guarding, because they will just become more specialized and integrated functions over time.
Well, we've also got the things like robotics and drones, and, you know, you see AWS coming out with a home robot now. And is that a security device? If it's, you know, monitoring and conducting surveillance and the like. I suppose this leads to the PSG, Protective Security in Government Conference, because as I mentioned in you're wearing various hats, but maybe talk us through the lineup, because how much of the report are you putting forward at the conference? Because you've got some real heavy hitters there in government as well, to say, look, here's a report. We've done some thinking about it, and we've gone out and asked a lot of people, and here's 100 pages to read. But we want some change. And again, I come back to that key point I raised in our first session with Will and John, and we are dealing with a federated system that's 100 years old, and we're trying to apply it now in 2021. It's just not going to happen. If it didn't happen during the pandemic, it's never going to happen. Tell me I'm wrong.
So the optimist in me says never say never, but it's certainly, I mean, listening to John and Will, just around the complexity and the acronym alphabet, and, you know, who's reporting to who and who has authority over who, you know, it certainly is a complex challenge. But I think there's a few things we have to bear in mind, and I'll segue between the report and PSG as we go. You know, one of the things that the report highlighted was obviously the critical role that the security sector plays in national security, and that we also have a huge opportunity to expand that capability, evolve that capability to further support national security, disaster response, emergency management, you name it. But, and this is the big but, for that to happen, we need consistency. And this is part of that interesting challenge. So, you know, when was it? Probably when the Protective Security Policy Framework reforms came out, which I think they were released in 2018. The federal government didn't have the Security and Government Conference they used to have. They stopped running that in 2017 or 16, I think. So we were asked by attorney generals, you know, could we put on an event that would enable them to share the PSPF reforms? And we did. And this has grown into now, you know, 3 to 4 years later, the modern version of the Protective Security and Government Conference, which, to your point, is a real cracker this year. You know, we've got ministers, we've got the head of the UK Preparedness Commission, Lord Toby Harris. We've got guys heading up US Department of Homeland Security CISA program. The list just goes on and on. And what we've really tried to do this year is get this melting pot of thought leadership going in the protective security space. So while it is government-centric, if you are involved in security or risk, you really do need to look at this, because there will be something there for you that you will want to know about, grab, or understand.
Yep.
What we try to do is look at things like critical infrastructure. And I think Will and John both mentioned the new SOKI legislation that's coming out. So we wanted to be able to get people from Home Affairs and other stakeholders to talk a bit about that, so that people hear directly from those key government authorities what their appetites and what's going on there. We also obviously, with the changing dynamics in our geopolitical situation, want people to get a threat update and some understanding of what's going on with that stuff. And needless to say, because of COVID, cyber has become bigger than it ever was and will continue that momentum. So we've integrated and focused a lot on cyber. We've got the head of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and a whole bunch of other really influential providers and stakeholders in the cybersecurity world to come and share. And at the same time, we've got long-term practitioners, okay, people like Tim Corey, who have been in government security for decades, sharing some of their experience. We've also tried to look at some of the segue skill sets. So we've got Don Bletchley, who's the Chief of Transport, Network Security and Resilience for Queensland Government at TMR. Don's had a long career of floods, fires, you name it, COVID. And his department has been the leader in incident emergency response. So we've got this big melting pot of ideas and people coming through. The other thing, obviously, we did have to shift online. It's a bit soul destroying because we had a really cool setup at the National Press Club in Canberra and a whole bunch of things running there. But there are pros. And I think the pros with that are it's going to be recorded. So if you buy a ticket and you can't come to the whole thing, you can watch it later or pick the pieces you want to review. There's a whole bunch of freebies. ASIAL has offered, the full Security 2025 report, as you mentioned, is, I think it's just under $1,000. The ASIAL website. It's free if you buy a PSG ticket.
Oh, nice.
Which is very nice of ASIAL. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we're working on to create value adds and things that make it useful. So I would urge anybody in the security industry, please spread the word. It's going to be worth your while. And it's one of those, it literally is a once-in-a-year event that does bring together private, public, and starts this convergence conversation happening at a real level where we're looking at cyber, physical, protective security, crisis management, risk management, all in an integrated melting pot.
Well, what I can say is what I would like to see out of the conference, given the lineup that you've got, and as you say, you've got some real, you've got policy there as well as the practitioner side, is to align it with the Security 2025 report on the outcomes, and just, I think particularly the content, and try to capture where our political leaders and our industry leaders see where things are going, and to give some direction, given the complexity, as you've pointed out, and as John and Will pointed out, within the government framework itself, because we are asking Department of Home Affairs to take leadership at a federal level over sort of the state police agencies, slightly different structures in each state on how they regulate the industry as well, but to get some national consistency, at least so it can be a bit more easier to circumvent each one's. And I think that's the key one. And unfortunately, ASIAL's obviously beaten up continuously about this because they're on the front line in terms of an industry association, trying to change that, and they've been talking about it for so long. As you say, they're quite patient and optimistic, as you are. But yeah, what are some of the other key ones out of the report itself that you thought took you by surprise, or that you'd like to highlight?
So I think there's many, as we discussed, but let's just talk a little bit more around the methodology as to why we suggested a security industry coordination office be formed at Home Affairs, and why Home Affairs. We interviewed and we ran a focus group with all the different regulators around the country, and they don't have an easy job either. And I think this is one of the things that providers often forget is without regulators, it becomes exceptionally chaotic. We get, really bad behavior, because if, we talk about an industry, a lot of people threw up things like sham contracting as one of those key problems. Imagine how bad that would be if we didn't have regulation. I think it's important we don't position ourselves to say we're not for some sort of regulation or minimum standards. What we are looking at is streamlining and efficiency. And what we want to do is be able to contribute to national security in a really meaningful way, not a coincidental or ancillary way when things go wrong and there's a need to uplift capability or get more bodies on the ground. So realistically, Home Affairs is the umbrella security agency for federal government, driving the SOKI legislation and many other pieces. If we didn't have one sort of federally driven structure that actually, for lack of a better descriptor, actually said to everybody, hey, this is not in the national interests. It's, to be honest, not even in your state's interests. You carry on doing the same thing you've repeatedly done. I was on another podcast with Cameron Smith, who runs SLED in New South Wales. And, he was quite open, saying that, hey, we lose money out of the security industry regulation portfolio. And it's not a moneymaker for us. And, we have no choice but to keep going where we're at because we have no better alternative. We're trying to do the best we can. And it's really interesting because ultimately, unless there is a national driven initiative that goes, and you asked John Blaxland the point, what happens if we go to war? It is something to think about. Nobody thought we would lock down for 2 years and our economy would be torn into shambles. And that happened. If we go to war and we don't have these national structures, trust me, they will happen like that. Okay.
Well, that's my point, is if it didn't happen during a pandemic, is it actually going to happen? And you're going to find WA will go, okay, well, if Australia's at war, that's the time we're actually, we're out of here. So it has highlighted the fact that it's unlikely to happen in the near term, even if there is a major conflict, because if a national pandemic isn't the trigger, I don't know what is.
And to support your point there, one of the things that we really want to do of this report, and, to be honest, it's the driver for my businesses, it's the driver for PSG, is those things that are manageable and preventable. It's really poor show when we don't do the right thing and actually proact where possible. And even this discussion around resilience, it's a great discussion, but where's the presilience? Where's the prevention? Where's the preparation? Where's the getting ready or the stopping the bad things happening? We're so fixated on this respond and recover thing, which is critical, but we've lost sight of how much control we have to prevent and potentially empower. So, hopefully, and this is really the hope. Yes, it is probably slightly optimistic to say that, our motherhood statement, which is a paragraph of what would good look like in the report, it's pretty optimistic to say that that would happen by 2025. But if it's just a little bit better, and if, for example, if you're a provider, a regulator, or a user, and you read the report and you go, that part is interesting, I want to do something about that, we're already moving in the right direction.
Yeah. And
ultimately, nobody's got a crystal ball, but, we can, with a fair amount of certainty, say things are coming down the line. We identified some technology megatrends, which whether, somebody's in cyber or runs a guarding company, you're not going to be providing good advice to your clients. You're not going to be securing your business or your department effectively unless you're aware of these things and at the very least know where to source expertise, even if you don't want to build it yourself.
Well, I think this is the decade of massive change, as you say, for the industry, but for all industry sectors. And that technology aspect is going to be another, that mega trend, as you say, is things that we're not going to be able to avoid. And we're under major change right now, as John highlighted as well, in terms of that contestation and conflict. So look, Dr Gavriel, Gav Schneider, the Group CEO of Risk2Solution, thank you so much for your time. We obviously could have gone for the full hour, but it's been an absolute pleasure. So get along next week, the 14th and 15th of October. We do have this on the MySecurity marketplace, so you can go to there.com, and otherwise there was Alicia put the link in for the conference as well on LinkedIn. And otherwise you can also access the report, Security 2025, a roadmap for the future. That is also available on the marketplace or free to ASIAL members, or if you get along to the Protective Security Conference, you'll also get a copy of the full report. And as John mentioned in the background there, that is a cracker of the report. I'll quote you. There you go. It's a cracker of a report from John Blaxland, Gav, so you can't get better accolades than that.
I was going to say, Chris, my work is done. If Professor John Blaxland says it's a good report, there you go. I'm good.
Wonderful. Well, look, I'll let you go, mate. Thank you so much, and I'll do some finishing off with the reports of the week and what we've got coming up. So thanks, Gav. Pleasure having you back on. Cheers, mate.